In the UK, there's really no political interest. There's a really strong stigma. I think we've had one MP bring it up in Parliament, and they were laughed at pretty much. The RAF, who is our Royal Air Force, who was in charge of monitoring all of this, has ruthlessly covered it up. They will just dispose of records. So, for example, most of the historical cases now, if you submit a FOIA, they literally just say, "Oh, sorry, yeah, we were just cleaning out old paperwork and we got rid of it."
Welcome to another talk where we tackle the theme of UAPs through European perspective. This time I have a guest who switches between living in the UK and Spain. His name is Tom Vernon. His background is in music, history, and hospitality. Tom has a keen interest in the field of consciousness and its connection to the UAP field. Tom also has a major interest in science. He is a regular contributor to the UAP Files YouTube channel, and he also has his own channel, which is called simply Tom Vernon UAP. So, hello Tom, how are you doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Jan. Yeah, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you. That was a very nice introduction. I'm not used to being talked about.
Yeah, I mean, we should tell some basic stuff. So, at the beginning, I would be happy if you would say something about how your curiosity about UFOs started and what kept it going.
Sure thing. Okay. It can be a very long story, so don't let me run off too much. But basically, when I was growing up, I was very interested in military planes, and I used to sit and look and identify them, and I had all my little books that told me what I was looking at. So that's where that interest started. But honestly, I never really had any interest in UFOs or anything like that until I think it was 2020 when I had a sighting. Um, so it was very interesting. I didn't know it at the time, but I'd kind of done what we call CE5.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, I can go into detail about it with pleasure, but so basically, I'd seen a interview with four different people who didn't know each other. Two of them were meditating, one was praying, and another one was just out for a hike.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd all had this moment of kind of reflection, and then this ball of light had appeared. And these four people didn't know each other. They'd
Mm-hmm.
never met, but they'd all had the same type of experience. So I thought that was really interesting. And at the time, I was working in a hotel. So one night I drove home and I'd been thinking about it all day. And well, I pulled up, turned the car off, and I looked out of I opened my door a little bit, looked out, and I said in my head, "Go on then, if this is real, show me. That would be awesome." And then there was this bloom, a bit like a Christmas bulb, but blue, and it came on for about 3 or 4 seconds and then went out, and it was exactly where I was looking. So I mean, I had the goosebumps and I was a bit freaked out, but I went in the house, and a couple of days later, I kind of forgot about it. In a way, I'd sort of realized that I'd maybe it was because I'd done a big long shift, and maybe it was something in my head rather than external because it was perfectly where I was looking. About 3 weeks later, when I'd kind of put it behind me, I had another sighting where I was playing video games in this very chair, and I was sort of compelled to look out of the window. And so I paused what I was doing, which is very strange because I was having a great time anyway. And I looked out of the window and I could see Mars. Um, and yet there was another thing that looked like Mars underneath it. So I have an app on my phone called Stellarium, which is free and brilliant. And you point your phone at the sky and it tells you what's there. So I pointed my phone at the sky and I could see Mars, but I couldn't see this other thing that I could see with my eyes. So it wasn't anything, it wasn't a planetary body and it wasn't a satellite because it shows you all of those. So then I said, "Oh, that's weird," and then it started to move. So it was underneath Mars like this, and it went around in a circle. And when it got to here, it shot off like a spark, this orange blur. Um, so then I was really interested because I remembered this previous sighting that I'd had, and I really wanted to know everything about what it was that I'd seen. So it started from there, and it's just kind of snowballed to be honest. And since then, I've had a lot of sightings and different strange things happen. And it seems to be that the more you look into this stuff, the more it looks back a little bit, I think. So, shortening the boring story, I've completely changed my life, and I quit my job because I just wanted to study what this was, and then you start looking at history, and you start looking at physics, and you start looking at religion, and then you start seeing these crossovers, and it's fascinating. I find it absolutely fascinating. So it's really confusing how I've come to be doing this, but I ended up collaborating with the UAP Files because I was looking at their account, which is really good, and they would just I didn't like uh, sort of X-Files music and CGI aliens and stuff. I just wanted facts and history, and they did that really really well. So we ended up just we struck up a conversation. Then he asked me to be on it and talk about my experiences, and then he asked me to be on as a co-host because we had an astronomer on the show, and at the same time I wanted to make documentaries about the things that I was learning because my memory is terrible. So I thought if I make these things into a YouTube video, then there's another me somewhere that's just having their first experience, and hopefully I can make something that is useful to somebody else that's trying to figure out the world. And here we are. So I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and now I get to speak to wonderful people like you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, once you really start to research it or you have some experience, you kind of don't stop. We started to do C5 in 2021, and this summer we also doing some events. So very much looking forward to them. The actually the first one we have this year is next week. So
Great.
very yeah, yeah. So and that flash that you described,
Yep.
I think we see it many times on the sky that something like flashes, but I mean, for sometimes it can be like a proof for yourself, this kind of flash on the sky, because it's like literally where you're looking and like what
Mm. Yeah,
something
that
that
was that was what really hooked me because like I said, I was interested in military planes and things like that. But
hmm.
the fact that both times it had been like an interaction with my consciousness. First time it was exactly where I was looking, exactly when I said. And then the second time, I mean, it literally, got me by the nose and pulled me away from what I was doing to make me look out of the window. And that I found that fascinating because it's so easy to misidentify an object or a bird or Venus, and there's all of these normal explanations, but when it is something directly interacting with you, it was even more interesting to me because it's something outside of what we know in terms of physics.
Hmm. Yeah. And as you mentioned, you spent time both in UK and Spain. And imagine yourself a situation that you should choose if you go to some public place, let's say a pub or some coffee place, and talk with your friends about it and other people also hear it. Would you be more comfortable to tell this story in UK or in Spain? How is the atmosphere? Are more skeptics
That's a great
Spain
question.
or UK, you know?
That's a really good question. I would say, I think a bigger question is kind of the stigma in general, and And I was certainly very nervous about talking about my experiences, and that you go through what they call ontological shock, where you realize that the world is different to how you understand it. So I think just on a personal level, it took me quite a while before I would actually say, I've seen this and it's really strange.
Mhm.
There was a certain point where I realized that I'd actually seen it. And so if I didn't speak up, then I was a coward because there's other people seeing these things.
Mhm.
And, somebody needs to, if everybody's honest about what they've seen, I'm not saying I know what it was,
Yeah.
but if everybody's honest, then that empowers other people that have had, because the stigma is you feel very isolated for a very long time. But I would say that in Spain, um, I think in Spain they're a lot more laid back in general, but it is on the kind of south coast, so it's not like the inner city folks, that take life very seriously. But in England in general, there's a general way of life where you don't express your feelings. It's just part of the culture. You'll see somebody outside, and if you do say anything, you'll say, how are you? And they'll go, fine. And they might be having the worst day of their life, but they'll say, fine. There's a term, stiff upper lip, um, that the British used in the war, where, if you showed emotion, that was kind of a lack of discipline. And I think the last echo of that now is that people are very hesitant to talk about anything which isn't mainstream. You can talk about sports and the weather and things like that as much as you like, but when it comes to religious things or paranormal things, I think they're a lot more hesitant to discuss that. Whereas in Spain, particularly where I my mum lives in Mojaca, there's lots of a bit more hippie culture, if you like. So everybody's a little bit more far out. There's lots of artists and people wearing bright clothes and stuff. And I think they were a bit more accepting of the subject over
Mhm.
there.
Okay. I mean, in Czech Republic, it's more like that if you talk about it, I feel like people kind of ignore it, or I don't know. Like I tried a bit. I mean, I'm not really pushing the team. If people are not interested, it's fine. I mean, I just find I have my people to talk about it. And but for instance, I tried to post some like serious information to my group of friends from university back when I was studying, and every time I tried, it was just ignored. So it didn't really work
Yeah.
out so well.
But I think there's an element of it which because I've thought about this a lot, and then a lot of my old friends that knew me from, my old jobs and that hadn't seen me for 6 months and everything had changed. And
Mm,
then you bump into, and for a long time I was like, yeah, I do YouTube now. Anyway, let's talk about something else. But now I, I think once you get to the point of sort of, I know that this happened and I don't care. I'm not going to pretend that it didn't. And 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 now I'm a lot more. I mean, if people say what do you do, I just say, well, I make UFO videos on YouTube, and then just get it straight out of the way. And it's always sort of five people will laugh, but then two people will come to you afterwards and say, I've never told anybody this before, but I've seen, this thing, and then when I was little, this thing happened. So it's one of those things though that, and I think you have to experience it to understand just what a profound thing it is. Because when I've spoken to some of my very middle-aged, intelligent friends, they'll say, "Look, yeah, dead interesting, but it's not going to help me pay the rent,
mm,
and things like that." And I think it's when it gets you individually and picks you up and shakes you and then puts you down again that you can't think about anything else. And even people that trust me completely, parents or very, very close friends, if I tell them what's happened to me, there's just some sort of, I mean, people call it an ontological immune system, but it's to protect your own state of mind from things that will be crazy. And yeah, I think even the person that trusts you more than anybody else won't be able to get just what a profound experience it is until they have it themselves.
But in UK, I feel like there's that history that I mean, there are famous cases like Rendlesham Forest or
Yeah.
so on, right? Crop circles. I mean, in Czech Republic, we don't have this like some cultural like hook that we could talk about. If we
Mm.
talk about something, then it's from a foreign country or that of one like one, two maybe interesting case in Czech Republic, but it's not a big deal. But it's a bit odd to me that in UK it is a bit still under the stigma. Like, can you understand why it's like that?
Yes. So this is something I think about a lot because I mean, the UK has a very long mythological history because we were invaded so many times. I mean, the people that think they're patriotic with their St. George shirts and all of that, they don't realize just how many different cultures have sort of latticed to form English or British culture. But there is definitely a very strong pushback. So what we do in Britain is we have lots of sarcasm, and we're very quick to use humor as a weapon. And even though there's been some phenomenal cases, I mean, from the Calvine UFO with the photograph of the diamond-shaped object, which I think was American Air Force, to Rendlesham, to the Warminster thing, to the crop circles. It seems like every county has its own huge, huge story, and yet the RAF, who is our Royal Air Force, who was in charge of monitoring all of this, has ruthlessly covered it up ever since before World War, since the Foo Fighters in World War Two. They've always ruthlessly covered it up. They will just dispose of records. So, for example, most of the historical cases now, if you submit a FOIA, they literally just say, "Oh, sorry, yeah, we were just cleaning out old paperwork and we got rid of it." And this can be a fighter jet approaching a flying saucer, and you're telling me that, "Oh, no, no, we threw it away because that stuff's not real," and that's it. It's sort of that with the British culture of laughing at things that we don't understand or aren't mainstream, means that there's a really strong stigma. I mean, I think we've had one MP bring it up in Parliament, and they were laughed at pretty much. I mean, in Europe, you've got people like Francisco Guerrera, who mentioned it in the European Parliament, and that's fantastic progress. But in the UK, there's really no political interest, and that bleeds into the news, and we've got I'm not going to get political, but we have an extremely biased media
Mhm.
in terms of propaganda, and it sort of makes out like it's free press, but it's very much we're told we hear what we're supposed to be told, and they just don't touch UFO stuff. And if they do, it's usually got silly music on, and they talk about little green men just to take away the credibility of the witnesses. So it's a very difficult time for the UK.
Not long ago, I saw on the UAP, what is the podcast? UAP podcast
Yep.
video from 2021 where British Prime Minister of Defense was asked
Yeah.
about this stuff, and my feeling
Yeah.
was that the Ministry of Defense doesn't really care so much because it is not kind of like practical team that they don't have a concrete problem or so on. I don't know.
Well, I can talk about this at length, but that was
Mhm.
Lord Admiral Hill Norton that I think you saw, and he was talking about the Rendlesham Forest case. Because Rendlesham, so in the UK, we are jokingly called America's biggest aircraft carrier because lots of our air bases are run by the Americans. So they use us as a little staging post to jump in, fuel up, and then go and do things around the world. And the Rendlesham encounter, that base was entirely run by American staff, but it was also a nuclear weapons storage airbase. So it had American A-10 planes on there, but then it had a nuclear stockpile, which was classified. And after the events of that, where the second in control of the base, Admiral Charles Halt, Colonel Charles Halt, submitted reports saying we've had these lights coming out of the forest, and all of these bizarre things. The Ministry of Defense basically said, yeah, nothing happened. It was Christmas. They saw a lighthouse. Forget about it. So the outrage from Admiral Hill Norton was saying, look, you've got two options. Either the people guarding nuclear weapons were all hallucinating, which is extremely dangerous, or something extraordinary happened. And we're not going to understand it if we're not brave enough to talk about it. But again, he was kind of left out on his own, and it was nothing really came to support it. Plus, the Rendlesham case is quite troublesome anyway because the witness accounts don't actually meet up. I do believe something happened, but I made a video looking into the truth of the Rendlesham case, and it doesn't do itself any favors, put it that way. But then there was a report, the Condign report was declassified in 2021, and that showed that although the Ministry of Defense had released a public letter saying nothing happened, there's nothing worth looking into, we're going to close the investigation, they actually did study it. And there's talk about, I mean, they were using the term UAP back in the 90s and the 80s. Um, and they were talking about studying these balls of plasma to potentially use them for military purposes to mess with radar and things like that. So it just like Project Blue Book in America, you had this surface level of saying no, 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 there's nothing to see here, but then actually a serious investigation going on underneath. So that's kind of where we're at.
And who would you say is the most helpful for UK disclosure? I mean, from Europe, we know the name like Gary Hasseltine. We had him on a UFO conference in Prague 2 years ago, or
Yeah,
Nick Pope, but
yeah.
that's kind of everything. Who do you root for in this matter?
Okay, that's a very good question because I have I've got quite strong feelings about this. As much as I mean, it's my personality that I love having heroes, and I love to have these characters that I can say, yes, David Grush, he's our man, we'll stand by him. But the danger of having you either put the data first or you put yourself in front of the data. And there have been countless people in ufology through the years that kind of blaze a trail, but then either through counterintelligence or their own mistakes, they can be discredited. And when they are, everything that they've brought to the table is lost as well.
Mhm.
You risk it all if you pin it all to yourself. So yes, Gary Heseltine is an ex-detective. He's an incredibly intelligent man. He's been interviewed on UAP Files, and I'm going to be interviewing him next week with Jeff Nusatelli. I think it's next week, but he's also, I mean, he's written books with Larry Warren, who's one of the witnesses from Rendlesham, and then I met Larry Warren and he was criticizing Gary Hazeltine. So it's like things become very fragile. And the same with Nick Pope. Nick Pope's done wonderful work. He's been on every documentary ever, a news report. But then Gary Hazeltine says that he's a government plant. So we run the severe risk because we're already a very small niche. Like I was lucky enough to be invited to a UAP conference in Madrid last year. the Contact UFO Congress, and it was wonderful. I met all of these experiencers and reporters and investigators. But then you walk out of the exhibition after 3 days of meeting all of these really interested people, and there are thousands of people in Madrid who have no interest in our topic. So I think
Yeah.
so the danger of us being in a niche is that when we start infighting, people don't remember the, oh yes, he's really good, he did this. They just remember the negative stuff. So, looking at America now, people criticize Lou Elizondo, and people also really like Lou Elizondo. People criticize Stephen Greer, and people also really like Stephen Greer. But when they're firing shots at each other, it brings everybody down. So the long answer to your question is the people I'm rooting for are people like you and me, and the people watching this show. Like, if you have an interest in this, you are the front line. If you're brave enough to talk about this with other people and to study the history of it, then you don't need people on expensive documentaries to tell you that they've got it all figured out, because they haven't. Anybody that tells you they've got all the answers is lying, frankly. So I think that for me, the real definition of disclosure is when this is a topic that we can talk about in the street, the same way, oh, the moon looks full tonight, or we can say I saw an orb, outside my house last night, and things like that, without fear of being mocked. So, yeah, I hope that's not too big of an answer, but I think there's a term called citizen journalism,
Hmm.
and I really believe that when your average people take an interest or are brave enough to bring it up in discussion, then we will achieve far more than relying on the same 5 or 6 people on podcasts to tell us a little bit more each episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I really liked, for instance, what Beatriz Villarroel did with the Europe UFO retrieval program. If you heard about it, that it's just like
Hmm.
totally independent thing that she was
Yeah,
like, yeah, we don't care. I mean, the government's told that there's nothing, so it's fine. They can have no problem with us because they said there's nothing.
absolutely.
And yeah, it is a really nice approach. I like to study what they're doing there at the north of Europe.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, Stanton Friedman, the legendary investigator, he used to say, if you can't attack the data, attack the person.
Hmm.
And that's what we see in a lot of current events, which I won't go into, where rather than talk about the data, they'll attack the spokesperson, and that's very much the case in ufology. You can do fantastic work for 30 years, but the secret is to make it open source. And if you just put the attention on the data instead of individuals, it's a much more difficult job for anybody working against that to hide it again. And it does happen, unfortunately. I mean, when you listen to people like Richard Doty, there is a long, long history of counterintelligence when it comes to this particular subject, and trying to discredit individuals, or get somebody that's done really well for really long and then feed them a load of fake information so that it discredits them in front of the internet. So yeah, I think the safest way to do this is stop treating it like entertainment, which is the problem that we do. It's all bombshell revelation, and then and
Mhm.
then there's nothing to back it up. We need to treat it more like science, where it's peer reviewed, not by people that are rigid in their belief. You should be fluid in your conclusions. And if we all work on this together, then it's a lot harder to discredit any one of us.
I mean, this age is not really a best thing for it. Now, the clickbait and so on is the winner of the attention.
That's right.
Um,
That's
but
right.
yeah,
I mean, it's true. I mean, unfortunately, I mean, I'm a hypocrite because I make YouTube documentaries, and it has to factor in,
yeah,
when I make a thumbnail for one of my videos, I have to put probably the best part of the documentary into the thumbnail just to get people to, oh, that looks
Mm.
interesting. Whereas, if I just say I'm going to talk to you about school school child encounters, for 2.5 hours, then people kind of don't click. But really, I think we need to change our mindset a little bit, and science isn't always sexy.
Hmm. And what do you what are you excited most about now from like all the European researchers and all the endeavors that are going on in the world? I mean, generally in the world, USA, Europe.
I think, just like we said, I mean, so I think that we're with the birth of the internet, in the 90s, all of a sudden the world could communicate in a whole new way. And when you consider, let's say, for example, you're Lockheed Martin and you've got a recovered craft, okay? How do you recruit for that? It was just like if you imagine the Manhattan Project, they couldn't go to um, Yale University with a sign and say, "Who wants to come and work on an atomic bomb?" They had to very quietly watch for the right people with the right trustability, and then say, "Do you want to come and work on a project?" And I can't tell you about it until you've signed up for it, and then you might get that person to come along if you offer them enough money. And then you have to sign them up to an NDA for the rest of their life. So if you're an aspirant scientist working on something like a special access program, you have no CV for that 5 or 10 year period that you're working on it. So your next project where you want funding for something, you can't talk about the work that you've just done. So it's very difficult to recruit for a special access program or a CIA counterintelligence program. Whereas us out here in the world, I mean, there are billions of us, and if we start networking, we are exponentially going to overtake anything that's been done in secret in no time. And what I find really, really exciting is that there are people starting to do this. So first of all, there's people like yourself, and I would be honored to be in that category where we're communicating globally about it
Hmm.
and sharing stories from our different corners of the world and not just looking at America's locked doors for answers. But then there are people, I interviewed a wonderful man last week called David Hooper, and he had been at an event called the Hackathon, which was on the USS Hornet, which is an aircraft carrier. And it was a tech meeting for investors, scientists, experiencers, all trying to solve the problem of UAP without NDAs. It was like an open forum for people to collaborate. So there were people that work on AI that were talking to people that develop cameras so that the AI can sift out, can learn what a UAP looks like and then train the cameras to look for that. David, for example, is building this amazing multispectral surveillance system, and he wants to do it so that there's a $250 one for people, which is just an infrared camera, and you can literally put it on top of your car or have it fit out your bedroom window. But then that goes all the way up to a $250,000 military radar thing with atomic clocks, but they all work together. So if I see something from my bedroom, that will tip off the huge one somewhere else, and vice versa. So I think the same could be said with people like Ezra Kelderman and Avi Loeb at the Galileo project. And the more that we can work internationally to pool our resources and our understanding of this. That's what excites me more than anything at the moment. Plus, I've got to say the development of our understanding of consciousness and how that seems to be meeting physics, I find absolutely fascinating at the moment. And I think it's very closely related with UAP.
Definitely. I mean, one of my very good friends with who I do C5. She originally has a master from USA in consciousness. She's a
Wow.
hypnotherapist. Yeah. We've been doing many C5 with her, and I mean, she does many wonderful things, of course, different therapies. But for the C5, this is really amazing. But what you mentioned, I mean, what I'm quite curious is I sometimes think about that there are these secret programs under maybe the military, different corporation in USA, like the Lockheed Martin in USA. And I wonder if something like this is in Europe. And I honestly am not sure. For instance, if you would ask me if it's in Czech Republic, I would probably tell you that I don't think so. But there are some people or some speculations in Czech Republic, but I think it's more of a conspiracy matter. But in the UK, maybe it could be more connected to the USA, but I don't know. I'm just curious. What do you
Yeah,
think
no,
about it?
that's an excellent point. I
Hmm.
mean, to speak about black projects for a second, if you are developing cutting edge technology that I don't even like the word opponents, but other countries don't know about, the last thing that you do is take it over the sea, international waters, or you take it over somebody else's boundaries, because if that crashes, then you lose control. Somebody else can recover it. And this has happened before. The real story of Firefox, um, a MiG 25 Foxbat had to land in Japan, and within about 2 days, the Americans had been there and more or less stripped the thing down to its nuts and bolts and back engineered it back in America. By the time the Russians got it back in crates, it had lost all of its technical edge. Even here, like on a farm very close to me in World War II, an experimental American night fighter, a P-69 Black Widow, crashed into a farmer's field. It ran out of fuel, and it was literally just buried over because they didn't want anybody, although we were an ally, they didn't even want us to have access to what would have been a special access program at the time. So that's why they test over Area 51 and Nevada in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the country, so that if the thing crashes, it's on American soil. And it just now to link it back to the UK, there were a couple of bases up in the north because the more north you go in England, the more sort of mountainous it gets, and then you get to Scotland, and that's very rugged and there's apart from the cities, it's very sparsely populated. And in 1989, on an oil rig, there was a guy called Chris Gibson, and he saw the same tanker that fueled the Blackbird because he was in the Royal Observer Corps, which is they're trained to spot planes and report it to the military just in case it's an opposing force. And he saw three F-111s, which was a big long range bomber, and this Strato tanker, which was specifically for the Blackbird, and it was fueling a black triangle. And he reported that all in. He even from the scale, because he knew the other planes, he managed to write the dimensions down. It's all there. It's worth a Google. But at the same time, we were detecting we had earthquake sensors, seismographs that were being tripped over the Atlantic, and we were detecting sonic and hypersonic booms over the Atlantic. And we only had a few planes that could go supersonic, things like the Tornado. So at the time, we were sort of asking, well, what the hell's going on? And it says in that Condign report that I mentioned earlier that there are two secret American platforms in use over the UK, but even we weren't. I mean, it was even redacted from the classified report which came out. So there is proof that I think with what they call the Five Eyes countries, Australia, Canada, us, um, I forget the others, where we'll probably test technology over the ocean and whatnot. But in general, you're absolutely right. They certainly wouldn't test these technologies anywhere near anybody that they would consider an adversary. And so, you guys are a lot closer to China and Russia than America. So why would you risk all your shiny toys in that kind of environment? I think that's a great point.
Yeah, but you think that solely the countries of Europe that they can have their own, like some special secret UFO program? Like, I don't know. I'm not so sure about it. If I could consider countries, then maybe Italy, maybe Germany, maybe
Hmm.
UK, maybe France, but
Well,
I
Italy
mean,
did.
yeah,
There is proof of that. So Mussolini set up.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, with the 1933 crash retrieval.
The magenta one, yeah.
Magenta, that's the one. That's the one. And
Mm,
he set up a special, I think it was F-21, a group to study that, including Marconi, who invented the radio.
yeah.
So, even just from there, we know that they've had an interest in it before. France, I believe, have been quite open about their UFO studies, and whilst they haven't said that we've got anything, they've
Mm,
been quite public with their investigations, unless that was just another blue book, to keep the public happy. I don't know, but I can't imagine that. So I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I don't really know how closely the EU countries um, work together in terms
mm,
of
mhm.
cutting edge technology. I know that they do for sort of budgetary stuff and things like the Eurofighter Typhoon. A part of that is made in more or less every European country. But
Mm,
when it comes to new developments, I think that the modern trend really is to buy American
yeah.
stuff. I mean, the certainly looking at the UK, we one of the things that we used to do more than anything really was invent cool planes. From the Spitfire to the Lancaster and the Lightning, and we had all of these awesome UK design planes. And now we just buy F-35s straight
Mm,
from America. So much so that the our
right.
Eurofighter factory closed last week
Hmm.
because we've got no orders from it and we're just buying all American stuff. So I think when it comes to the developmental side, and from a few historical cases as well, it seems like America, for some reason, just has this global Office of Global Access that works with the CIA, which just recovers things. So the Varginha case in Brazil, for example, uh, a cigar-shaped craft crashed, and then in no time at all blacked out American planes turned up. And that's kind of confirmed by the witnesses and the air traffic control and stuff. So, we already know they don't think much about other people's borders, from what they've been doing in the news. But I think it's a lot more America based when it comes
Mm,
to the acquisition and back engineering of this stuff. There's certainly, I don't think there's much chance of anything happening in the UK anymore because we've cut all of our budgets for military and navy and army and all of that stuff, and we're very, very dependent on America now. So
okay. Mm.
I can't imagine that we'd have these big underground laboratories that you hear about in America.
Yeah, I also don't think so. I mean, you mentioned the Magenta case, but it was prior to World War II or so on. And I guess that after the World War II, everything kind of got taken from Europe to USA. I think so. So I don't think there's much space for
Yeah,
things
well, we
now.
had. So I can be really boring about this. We had there was Operation Paperclip, which I'm sure
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
aware of, but
Yeah.
there was the English, oh British, had Operation Lusty.
Ah.
Now, Operation Lusty was prior to the end of the war, where we would send spies to places that we knew were developing technology so that we could steal it, so that we didn't have to share it with the Russians. So the Horton flying wing was basically stolen by the SAS and the RAF, and this is before because the idea of Operation Paperclip was that it was going to be one for you, one for me, one for you, and we deal out all the best scientists. But then they formed the CIA to spy on Russia to make sure that they weren't making any breakthroughs from the scientists that they'd got. But they definitely, there was already a British operation to go and steal any breakthrough tanks and engines and cannons because the Germans were phenomenal with their artillery and rocketry, as you can see from NASA. So yeah, there was definitely evidence of this type of exotic technology being recovered, even then, sort of prior to 1945. But I do think it all ended up in America.
Yeah, and now it is kind of like Europe is kind of in the dark. I don't know, because on the other hand, the positive thing that there's some connection, or I mean, I don't know if it's positive, but the director of the European Space Agency, Josef Aschbach, or something like that, he told that they actually communicate with NASA about UFO cases or something like that, and that was quite surprising. I saw it
Mm,
like a month ago on Twitter in some radio interview in German. So
yeah,
that's I
I've,
always get
I've
surprised that something is happening here in Europe.
yeah, I've got a lot more hope for the European Space Agency than I do for NASA. I think there's a
Ah,
lot of evidence that NASA have hidden
yeah.
evidence of UAP. I won't get too speculative, but
Hmm.
I mean, if anybody is going to see things in orbit and in space, it's them.
Hmm.
Plus, there's lots of the STS, the shuttle missions, where you can see all sorts of weird things on their cameras, and they're on YouTube. They're out there for public. But there's evidence of photographic plates going missing, and then of course Bill Nelson comes out and says, "Oh yeah, we've looked into it. There's absolutely nothing going on." Or Mike Gold at the last congressional hearing saying, "Well,
Hmm.
maybe if you give us $1 billion, then we can pay somebody to have a look in our storage." It's like as if, if I worked at NASA, every lunchtime I'd be there in the archives looking for for things. But I interviewed Professor Eamon Ansbro, who's head of the Kingsman Observatory, and he briefed the European Space Agency on UAP and orbs and CE5 and telepathic communication and quantum entanglement as a form of control and communication for these craft and stuff. So I mean, if he's briefing them, then at least somebody's making some progress.
Okay, I definitely want to watch that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's a great guy. I was honored because I mean I've become friends with him because I've interviewed him a couple of times.
Hmm.
And the last one that I did, he said he wanted to talk about consciousness, so I was well up for that. And then
Oh.
he'd done me this amazing PowerPoint display talking about trying to put some science into CE5, what works, what's repeatable, the intention of everybody has to be aligned and then making this sort of telepathic contact and stuff. And to hear that from somebody that's going to go and brief the European Space Agency, I was like, this is fantastic.
Hmm.
And he's done that once or twice. So yeah, it's great that people like that are speaking out.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. And are you still trying C5 and so on? Have you got some new experiences in this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I've had lots of experiences now, and I'm very shy from going, oh, I'm special because I'm absolutely not. I've just
Hmm.
put time into this, and I think it can happen to anybody that has the right intention and time. So, with that said, I've practiced CE5 a lot, and I've had quite a lot of good results. What I will say is, anytime you try and record it, nothing will happen. Um, it doesn't like being recorded. And I've had it with. So I've done CE5 in Spain with lots of people that meditate a lot and stuff like that, and you get better results because I think the secret is what we call the flow state.
Hmm.
And as I first experienced, you can get that from playing a video game. You can get that from painting a picture or driving a car or playing a guitar, and anything where you switch your conscious brain off lets this in. Um,
Hmm.
and and I think if you just the people have been doing CE5 since before history. But in the 60s you had Sisto Paswell's doing Mission Rama.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the same thing. I think if you just sit, I mean, I did it literally 2 nights ago when it was
Hmm.
we have got a heat wave over here, and it was just too hot to have all my computers and lights and stuff on. So I just sat looking out of the window for an hour, and it was a nice clear night. And then I was trying to keep my mind quiet, and then there's this huge white flash, and I'd already been watching satellites, so it wasn't a satellite going up and catching the angle of the sun.
Hmm.
It wasn't the ISS. I'd got Stellarium ready on my phone, so I just pointed that at exactly where I'd just seen it, and there was nothing there. So I think if you just don't put yourself under any pressure, that it's got to be a feeling of playfulness, and respect and gratitude. Then the worst case scenario is that the world stays as you think it is, and the best case scenario is there's something a lot more exciting out there for you.
Yeah, I didn't expect you were such a fan of C5. I'm happy because I'm actually quite a big fan of C5, or I'm doing it quite often. And yeah, I agree to this. And I would also say that it is important to kind of have openness that, something will happen and it can be different for people. And I also think it's kind of relate to what kind of person you are, that some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, some people can feel something, some vibrations on their body or whatever. It can be lots of stuff. So just, I think the openness is also kind of important. Yeah. Do
Hmm.
you have any
Yeah.
other tips on C5? So,
Well, I don't want to pretend I'm an expert. I've just done it.
oh, I mean,
I've
nobody is
just done,
expert on this, I would
no. Well,
say.
that I think that's all I would say to people is, first of all, it works. Call it
Yeah.
what you like, and people have interpreted it in lots of different ways, religious ways or scientific ways or whatever. Just go into it with the right intent. If you've got anybody there which is kind of giggling and
Hmm.
a skeptic, it's not going to come out to play. It's
Yeah.
just it's no different from, if you go out and sit out at night to try and see a fox or a badger or something. You've
Hmm.
got to be respectful, you've got to be calm, you've got to be quiet, and just be aware of your surroundings and just pay attention, and something might happen. But I would just say trust your intuition, and if you feel like nothing's going to happen, maybe it isn't. But if you can stay open and optimistic about these things, and just it's like when you remote view, for example, it's
Hmm.
not all a flash. You like you said, you'll get these extra sensory perceptions, so just be open to something cool happening. And I think
Yeah.
that your
Yeah.
intention is 100%, is 90% of the mechanics of it. There's a lot of things that we can't explain, but we know happen, like psychic mediums, for example, or Reiki. But
Hmm.
if your intention is there, you're more likely to have results. I know I can talk for a long time about things like the hitchhiker effect, and
Hmm.
that is a clear demonstration that if you are antagonistic to this stuff, you'll
Hmm.
get it back. Whatever you put out, you get back to you. And I think that applies to everything in life. But when these guys go to Skinwalker Ranch with their M16s and their big dark sunglasses, that's when things start getting spooky, and books start flying off shelves, and nasty things start happening. But when you go there with an open heart and just to meditate and show some respect for the
Hmm.
thing, and don't treat it like a dancing dog, you're getting a glimpse of something that you're very lucky to see. And if you're appreciative of that, then you've got a very good chance it will notice.
Yeah, I would just say that just to take it a bit more lighthearted, or how to say, just not so
Hmm.
seriously. I mean, the worst case that happens during C5 is just that you have a nice time under the sky full of stars, you know?
Exactly, exactly. If you can be happy just sitting and looking at the stars for an hour, then first of all you're my kind of
Mm,
people. But you know that's it. If you can be happy with that and just wonder at how beautiful everything is, I think that's the secret to getting this thing's attention, you know. Your intention is everything, and I definitely think that just go out and have a good time, and you may well be in for a nice surprise.
yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful way to kind of tell people to try it out and slowly get to the end of the interview. But do you have anything else to say before we wrap it up? And is there something exciting that's coming up or on your side?
Well, yeah. So I find myself really busy with this, and I really enjoy it now. So my YouTube channel is only small, but it's growing, and it's good. It's all good people, and that's what really matters to me.
Hmm.
So I think what's exciting is that more people on the back of, you know, the pilots and physicists that are talking about this. I think people are feeling a little more emboldened to come forward with their own stories now. So I would say what makes me most excited is that if you've seen something, just tell somebody, just tell your friend because they might have seen something too. And if we all do that, then anything could happen. I mean, all we're asking is to just tell your truth. You know, don't I don't think we're ever going to solve exactly what this thing is,
Hmm.
but I think we can keep an eye out for each other and kind of encourage each other to share what's happened, and then our understanding will grow.
Yeah, perfect. So, if you would like to hear more from Tom, it's Tom Vernon UAP YouTube channel. Go and see his stuff. And if you have any interesting experiences, please tell us in the comments. And yeah, this is it. And we both of us wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks for being here. Yeah.